and welcome to Mythmakers. Mythmakers is the podcast for fantasy fans and creatives, and in this we look at all the subjects that are of interest to people, particularly those who love Tolkien. And today I'm joined by Lisa Coutras, who is the writer of a book called Tolkien's Theology of Beauty, Majesty, Splendor and Transcendence in Middle-earth. Lisa is a theologian, and it's the first time, yes, so she's showing it there to us, it's the first time we've had a theologian on this podcast. And so we're going to be looking at the theological ideas underlying Tolkien's writing. So thank you so much, Lisa, for making time to come and talk to us on Mythmakers.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. So let's start at the beginning. All of us come to Tolkien probably way before we have our sort of academic ideas in mind. What was your first experience or exposure to Tolkien? Was it the books or was it the films? Which way round did you approach?
Well, for me, it was actually partly family and partly the films. So I knew about Tolkien because my mom and my brother read it, loved it, talked about hobbits. I didn't have any understanding of what they were talking about. And then when the films came out, of course, I went and saw them. And I was a teenager at the time, fell in love with them, saw the first film, of course, and then I read all three of the books, or the volumes, I should say, of the book. And that was my first exposure, and I started writing some fiction. Haven't really published any of it, but that's when I fell in love with literature. Really was Tolkien.
I think that's so brilliant that Tolkien, like just for me, that's exactly the same. My writing career was inspired by reading Tolkien and then wanting to do the same thing. I haven't, as a writer, ended up doing the same thing, but it was that impetus to try and open the same doors and create these big worlds that actually started. And I think lots of people, I'm sure most people listening to this have had that same impetus, which is, it's just a testament to this sort of fascination of his world and its inspiration. But you then went on clearly to sort of follow an academic training in theology, but in that you circle back to looking at Tolkien as a theologian. So how did that come about, and where does it fit in your studies? Is it something you went in knowing you're going to do, or did you then sort of find it just bubbling up to the surface almost by accident?
Well, it did evolve over time. So I ended up studying, in my undergraduate, I studied philosophy and biblical studies, and writing. So I did those three things, kind of a three-pronged approach. And with studying philosophy, fell in love with this like analytical approach to, meta-narrative, these larger concepts and so on. And then when I went and did my Master of Theology, my approach was narrative theology. Well, how does narrative speak to these, Christian ideas or these Christian philosophies? Because when I would read Christian fiction, I didn't like it. I thought it was lame. And I know there's good fiction out there. I just, I felt like it was very shallow or trite, or they would be trying so hard to tell an idea rather than just telling an excellent narrative. And so my thought was, well, how can narrative best communicate these theological ideas in a way that isn't pushy or obnoxious, or just preaching to the choir? And then when I went into my doctoral studies, I wanted to study specific authors who had done this well. How did they portray their Christian philosophy in a way that was not obnoxious or pushy or obvious? And I had a couple people in mind, but it was actually, I believe it was Michael Ward, the C.S. Lewis author. He was my inspiration in many ways. He instructed me to just do Tolkien. There's enough there, and there's actually not a lot of theological writing about him. So focus on him. He's brilliant. He's the best one. You should go do him. And obviously he was doing C.S. Lewis, and so he's like, go do Tolkien. And so I had this, inspired by an article by Stephen Lawhead, who talked about, the good, the true, and the beautiful, and how this was portrayed in Tolkien, and how he wanted to portray that in his novels. I was just captured by this idea of the good, the true, and the beautiful, because I had never actually encountered that, because, I wasn't Catholic. I came from a very, Protestant Christian background, and we hadn't really talked about the good, the true, and the beautiful as a concept. So I was just in love with this idea. And so Michael Ward said, well, go to Balthasar, go read him. He's going to talk about this. And so that's how I brought in the theologian Balthasar, or von Balthasar, and used him as a parallel to Tolkien to interpret him. And it just developed from there. And then Alistair McGrath, who is a theologian and a C.S. Lewis scholar, took me under his wing as his advisee for the thesis. And so it just developed from there and became what it is as the book.
So a lot of people listening to this would not have thought about Tolkien as a sort of theological or a religious writer at all. So perhaps it might be worth having a little basic chat about how Tolkien sat in this way, his background, faith background, and how he saw Lord of the Rings. Mm-hmm. For example, Tolkien was a Catholic, wasn't he?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very devout Roman Catholic. Loved his faith. He loved the liturgy and the Eucharist, and that was the center of his life. And when he wrote Lord of the Rings, he did not have it in mind at all when he was writing it. But then when he went through and revised it, he saw it everywhere as just permeating everything that he had written in Middle Earth. And when he saw it, he did everything he could to remove any reference to it, because he felt like if it's done right, it should be absorbed into the narrative, and that it should be captured in the stories that are told and the symbolism that is there. And he had no problem with symbolism, but he did not want it to be an allegory of life. It was not an allegory of the war. It was not an allegory of the atom bomb. It was just a beautiful story that he wrote to the best of his ability that would absorb his ideas and his beliefs about the world and then portray them through narrative and event and character.
I think that's a really important point to make, because there's a fear that if I think for many people who are reading this without a Christian faith or having their own faith background or no faith background, they wouldn't want to see him hived off as a Christian author. And I don't think Tolkien would either, would he? Because, as you were saying, he said he disliked allegory, but he liked applicability. Mm-hmm. So you can apply what you see in his works to your understanding of faith or life or beauty, or these things. But he says the power of that is in the reader's hands. Mm-hmm. Whereas in allegory, the power of the allegory is in the writer's hands, and it sort of takes you down one channel. Mm-hmm. So that it's kind of everybody is welcome in the world of Middle Earth, but he does want there to be that sense of his fundamental values, which is what he's writing from.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Okay, so let's go more to your work now. You have a particular view or a particular interest in this idea of transcendental beauty. Would you like to unpack that in sort of more simple terms as to, well, we probably all understand what beauty is, but what about this transcendental part of it? What are you getting at there?
For Tolkien, all of creation, I mean, this of course comes from, the ancient theological philosophy of, Catholic theologians, that all of creation is made up of the good, the true, and the beautiful. That is, ontologically part of everything. It is the essence of all. And anything that is evil or deficient is just something that has kind of chipped away at that and detracted from it. And we all have this idea of, what goodness is. In a religious context, goodness is, morality, and truth is, doctrine. But this idea of the beautiful is so often neglected because it is so much more. It's the imagination. It is glory. It is grace. It is something that is so much more and permeates everything. But the good and the true are really not fully themselves without something that is beautiful, without having this property of beauty. So you can be as moral and have all this moralism that you want, but it falls flat on its face if it isn't beautiful, if it doesn't enrapture your heart and enrapture your spirit and your imagination. And so in this Christian worldview where God is the creator of all and all comes from him, his character and his essence is reflected in all that he has made. And so if God himself is beauty, not in the sense of, he's a thing, but more that beauty itself is what it is because of God. And he is the ultimate beauty and the ultimate glory. So glory is the radiance, something that is greater than what we understand of as beauty in this world. And so, glory would be God's beauty, or it would be his beauty reflected in creation. So you're looking out at this beautiful mountain range and you're just, your breath is taken away and you're just enraptured by it. Well, what Tolkien's theology would say is that is a reflection of the glory of God, because he's the creator who made it. And so anything that is beautiful about it comes from his being. It comes from who he is. And so in Tolkien's narrative, anything that is transcendent or enrapturing of the imagination or moving, that would be derived from something more than just the material. He would say there is a spiritual world, and in this spiritual world, the spiritual world is part of the physical world. Like, they are together; they have to be integrated. And so, anything that is glorious about the material world is deriving it from the spiritual world. And then, it goes from there. This is creation, but God is the creator and it derives from him. So that's a very long roundabout explanation.
No, but he sets it up in the Silmarillion, doesn't he, with the song at the beginning of, the creation song, mm-hmm. which is in a way a summary of everything that's going to happen, mm-hmm. With the darker themes woven in by Melkor, the sort of the satanic power mm-hmm. within it. But it's all held in the entirety of the symphony that Ilúvatar, or the god, is creating. So you get a sort of taste of that. That's the music playing underneath Middle Earth, mm-hmm. And you need all the contrasts to produce the beauty. It's not just playing one note,
right?
So it'd be actually really interesting to look at examples of, in the text, examples of beauty, because whereas in the Silmarillion you've got the gods, the sort of the step down from Ilúvatar, the sort of pantheon gods, mm-hmm. who are very much present in the first age and referred to, and in the second age. By the third age, which is the time in which Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit is set, there is hardly any mention of the gods, is there? They're completely pushed back out of sight. Mm-hmm. What do you think? And there is no sign of anybody worshipping in any sense in Middle Earth at that stage. What do you think is Tolkien's place within the world, the more familiar to most readers world? What's the place for God and those concepts in Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit?
Well, I think what he would say is, the Silmarillion is elf-centered. It is from the perspective of the elves. And then Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit are Hobbit-centered. And so while they encounter, elves and humans, they very much see it from their own perspective as hobbits. They there's no special revelation, as Tolkien would say. There's no, there's no understanding yet of a god, of a coming savior. Like, all of that is on the peripheral. And so in this world of natural theology, as he puts it, where you get a sense of truth through creation, that would be the world of Lord of the Rings. But then you see, Galadriel making reference to Elbereth. Mm. And you see, in Elbereth, of course, is, starts with a V. What's her name? It's the female god of Valinor, and yet what Tolkien would say is, well, they're not gods. That's just what humans see them as, because they see this power, this great power, and humans are prone to worship them. That is what he would say, and that's probably what he did say, I think, in his letters, is that when humans encountered these, they no doubt thought they were gods and worshipped them. The elves saw them as these angelic guardians, whom they had a relationship with, and who I mean, they could even intermarry with. And so these were greater powers who were essentially spirit who could take on physical form, whereas the elves were essentially physical form who, of course, had the integration of spirit. So I think in Middle Earth, the reason you don't see a lot of that stuff, and you probably took it out if there was any of it in there to start with, it's because it's, it's Hobbit centered, it's human centered, and of course there's like a knowledge of the one that the noblemen have. So like Aragorn would have knowledge of the one, and Faramir would have knowledge of the one. And of course there's that moment where Faramir and all his men have that moment of silence and look toward the west. So there's this thought of like, is this a moment of prayer? But they are the noblemen who are educated in that sense. So they have knowledge of it from the elves, ultimately, historically. So that's what I would say. And of course, there's that moment where Frodo, he calls out to Elbereth when he's in Shelob's lair. So there are these like small moments where Tolkien weaves it in there very subtly where it's not obvious that he is, in a sense, praying to Elbereth in the sense that, Catholics would pray to the saints for help. And they would say, please pray for me. Please help me. Please go to God and request his assistance. And so that I think is more the perspective of like what the elves would do, or like this incantation that Frodo has this moment of calling out. So it's much more subtle, and I think that's very much on purpose.
And I think there's also a sense that Gandalf says and Galadriel too, there's a sense of providence working in the activities. So there's that message that, Bilbo was meant to find the ring and you were meant to be the one to take it. It's the idea that there is some sort of plan that means that they're the right people in the right place, which sort of has this sense of behind the scenes, there is some greater good that is working for the hobbits, for their success.
Yeah.
Also, perhaps we could also unpack a little the idea of beauty itself, because yes, there is a lot of discussion about how beautiful Galadriel is and how beautiful Arwen is in terms of classic feminine beauty, though in a sort of extreme form because they're these lovely elves. But I think it's not just that, is it? Because there's another bit where they refer to Frodo after his when he's in the Houses of Healing in Elrond's sick bay. He seems to spend a lot of time, unfortunately, in the equivalent hospital. But he's sort of gone partly. There's a sense of light coming from inside him, and Sam also looks at him later on and says that he's sort of beautiful. The sense of a beautiful soul, and we do know that Frodo isn't classically beautiful. He's a 50-year-old, sometimes slightly overweight hobbit. Nobody says, gosh, he's a real stunner. It's something else that's being referred to here, which is beauty that is, I think, picking up your phrase, the radiance of God's glory, the sense. And I'm sure that, there must be other characters. What other characters do you see that are beautiful in that way?
Yeah, the beauty of the soul is certainly the driving force of physical beauty in Tolkien's world. I believe it was, I want to say Glorfindel was the one that, in the movies it's Arwen who comes and rescues Frodo from the Dark Riders. But in the books, I believe it was Glorfindel. And Frodo sees him as he himself is passing into the spirit realm because he's been stabbed by the Morgul blade, and so he is passing into the spirit world as a wraith. And as he's passing into the spirit world, he sees the spiritual version of Glorfindel. He sees him as he truly is. He's shining, with light. And what Gandalf says, I think it's Gandalf, says later is that what Frodo sees is that these high elves from the West live at once in both worlds. That they live in the spiritual world, they can see spiritual beings, but they also live in the physical world as a physical being. And so they are, in a sense, infused with this transcendental light from the trees of Valinor back in the day before they were destroyed. And that light permeates their spirits, and they are the most beautiful of all the elves and the most high and noble of all the elves. In Frodo's case, as he is, in a sense, being wasted away by the ring, the beauty of his soul is starting to shine through, because he is sacrificing himself. He is showing mercy to Gollum. He is showing these virtues that are, in a sense, eating away at him, because it's, in a Christian worldview, you are dying to yourself. You are dying to these, passions or these desires that, work against your soul, or, your selfishness. And in denying himself of these things and showing mercy and giving of his life, it is, he is dying to himself, but his spirit is coming alive, and it is shining through his physical form, even as he's wasting away toward the spirit world. And then someone like Arwen, someone like Galadriel, it is their spirit that brings true beauty, because beauty by itself, in a material sense, is and can be very deceptive. So we see that when Galadriel is tempted by the ring, she is terrible and worshipful, beautiful beyond compare, but that beauty is a deceptive beauty because it is not good. And yet when she passes the test, she is, just a simple maiden who is, still beautiful. And that, I think, is the true beauty, as they are, dying to themselves, and they are giving up of themselves for the good of Middle Earth and for the good of their companions.
Yeah, so that links to the sort of evil beauty, which is very prevalent in The Hobbit, because the lure of gold, the lure of gems, the lure of the Arkenstone, and of course the lure of the ring itself, which goes over into the Lord of the Rings. This is all a deeply bitter fruit. Everyone is sent mad, or it's their undoing as a person if they succumb to this desire for something beautiful, which is not at heart good. And of course connects back to Sauron, when he was pretending to be the friend in Numenor, and he was a beautiful, he's outwardly beautiful at that stage when he's in bodily form, but he's rotten inside. And that sinks a whole island, so it's pretty bad news. So I think that there's some very interesting plays on what is, because if you think of a number of beautiful artifacts, they all are pretty disastrous, aren't they, in Tolkien's world? Yeah, for sure. But not so places, because we've talked about human beauty and the beauty of artifacts, but I think of something as a reader that you come away from in Lord of the Rings in particular is a really overpowering sense of the beauty of place. And how does this fit in with the sense of the transcendent beauty? I'm thinking here obviously of Rivendell and Lorien in particular.
Yeah, and then what also comes to my mind is, in the Silmarillion, all the things that are described there, and it makes your heart ache a little bit because you want it to be real. You're like, why isn't this world real? And you feel the same way about Middle Earth, that there's all these beautiful things that are so like certain places in our world, and yet are more. And I believe it's Peter Kreeft that says it's not that his world is like ours, it's that our world is like his. That he is tapping into some sort of Platonic ideal that is so much more than what we encounter here. That he is trying to reflect something that is higher and greater. And it makes your heart ache because you want it to be real. So, and I think, for Tolkien, all of creation is connected, and all of creation is infused with the glory of the creator, and yet it keeps, falling just a little bit over time, as it wastes away. And even at the beginning, it wasn't what it could be, because it kept getting poisoned by Melkor and so on, and it keeps going from there. And just the different kinds of beauty that you see, in Fangorn Forest. It's a different kind of beauty than the Shire, and even Lorien is a different kind of beauty than Rivendell. And even when the elves leave, Lorien just fades away, and passes away, it says. And so, yeah, it just leaves your heart aching a little bit, I think.
Yeah, it was interesting thinking, following this thought of the transcendent beauty and thinking about what the other Inklings do with the same idea. Of course, they're all sharing ideas. Mm-hmm. And it brought to mind two things. One is the last battle for C.S. Lewis, with the idea that you go through the stable door to a sort of even more real world. And Tolkien has I think it might be on Fairy Stories, where he talks about myth makers make green really green, and, you know, tree really, really tree-ish. Yes. You know, it's the intensity of the language that you're looking for in when you start doing it as a myth. And that's what C.S. Lewis attempts to do in that. It's a bit of a problematic book, isn't it? But it's a fascinating idea of sort of going further back and into a more of a paradise that's sort of even more Narnia than the Narnia you read about in the earlier books. Mm-hmm. And the other writer in the Inkling Circle who played with these ideas, and first, I think, is Charles Williams in his novel Place of the Lion, which is a extraordinary fantasy work in, I can't remember exact date, it's about 1936. It's quite early on. But in that, the problem is that the Platonic ideals are breaking in to ordinary life. It's like there's a rift, very Doctor Who-ish. There's a rift in time of all these Platonic ideals are leaking through. So you get a lion coming into the world, which sucks in all those things with lionish qualities. And then all the butterflies are being sucked in, like sort of hoovered up. Yeah. That's probably downplaying his very powerful writing there. But it's sort of threatening the lesser copies. And the job of the heroes in that is to close the gaps, close the rifts. So it's interesting. They're all searching. All these writers are searching for that, the ungraspable, the even more beautiful, which our imagination can reach for, but we can't actually find.
Right.
So we're all a bit homeless, aren't we?
Yeah.
That's why we all go back to read the book again.
That's right. That's right. And I think what Tolkien and Lewis would say is, there's a sense of wonder and desire that is stirred in us that we don't know where it came from or what it's pointing to. And, like Lewis would say, it's a memory of a memory, that when you're enraptured by this great beauty or this great moment, it makes your heart hurt because you remember something, but you can't quite remember what you're remembering. And Tolkien does that a lot in Middle Earth, where it's so beautiful, so moving that it makes your heart ache because you want it to be real. And he would probably say, well, it's reminding you of something more, of a world that once was or will yet be.
Yeah, so it's not just nostalgia, is it? So one reading of Tolkien is that places like the Shire are longing for a world he saw being dug up for the motorways and factories, which I think it's there too, as well. But there is a sense of it's never existed either. The idyllic landscape, this perfect world of the Shire. I live near villages that are pretty like that, but I'm sure they never had a moment in time where they were always in that sort of bucolic dream. You only have to read Thomas Hardy to see how hard it could be out in the countryside. So it is that's a different sort of beauty. It's a community centered, smaller, deliberately smaller beauty. And the same goes for the heroic values of Aragorn. So you've got ideals of kingship all through stories like Arthurian legends, but you can't locate those in any particular king or time in history. You're never actually able to find them, though you see reflections of them in some codes of behavior or the occasional hero.
It's like it's extracted and distilled from different characters we've seen in history, or different people we've seen in history, different legends we've heard. And it's like it's all the good things are being extracted and then distilled into a fictional character. And that's interesting.
So Lisa, I mean, one of the reasons I really wanted to talk to you is that I think that this sense of beauty is absolutely key to the success of Lord of the Rings. And the reason why it really gets its hooks into our souls as people is because it is offering this ideal of a place that we can feel is, we all just want to walk, I'm mixing my metaphors now, but we all want to walk through the wardrobe just to be there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we go back to read it again. But when I look at other sort of more recent fantasy series, I don't see people writing with the same sense of that there is this, that these ideals are graspable or in their work. So I was wondering if that's because we're all too cynical now,
Mm-hmm.
And we go for more of a Game of Thrones bloodbath approach, or I know Star Wars has a sense of purity in the Force, of course,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but it's always sort of tippling over to the dark side, which I suppose you get that in Tolkien too. It's just really interesting to know whether anyone else can do this. Can anybody else capture this real sense of the transcendental beauty? You were saying to me before we started talking that you're not so well versed in contemporary fantasy, but has anything caught your eye? Any attempts in this direction?
Well, what comes to mind is, well, I kind of gave up on modern fiction because I would go to the bestseller rack and I'd pick up a book and, you know, read it and just be like, why is this a bestseller? This is written terribly. And I just started going back to the classics because it seemed like the classics, you know, Count of Monte Cristo, you've got Jane Austen, you have, you know, just those sorts of classics that they're just written to really encapsulate human life in one small aspect of time. And the ones that are successful because they were excellent and they were true to reality. And I think a lot of what's missing in you know, the current days is, yes, there's a cynicism, and yes, there's a loss of beauty in everyday life, that, you know, we're all very focused on technology and our technical toys. And that's, you know, something that Tolkien said in one of his letters, that, you know, we're so focused on all of that we have forgotten about, you know, beauty and the true things about human life. And I think the successful authors are the ones that really try to capture, you know, the reality of human life, but also try to nourish the imagination with certain goodnesses that are in life. And it doesn't even have to be, you know, from my perspective, it doesn't even have to be Christian. You know, it can be something that encapsulates the truths of human life in a way that encourages the spirit and uplifts the spirit. And I think what we lose is this desire for excellence. And I think with the ability to, you know, publish online so easily on blogs, and you know, it is harder to publish in an actual publisher. Like, you have to have an agent nowadays, but it's so much easier to get your stuff out there that I think the market is so flooded in one sense that you can't actually find the ones that are truly excellent, because they're out there, but there's just so much out there that's in the way, or things that are so well done in a, let's say, a Game of Thrones way, where it's very well written, it's very well shot, it's very well acted, but it's so carnal. You know, there's such a lust for blood. There's such a, you know, a relational lust. You know, it's all very carnal in that human sense, even though it's crafted beautifully. So we need to somehow make a beautiful craft with the beauties of human experience, and that the contrast. I mean, there's always going to be darkness. There's always going to be evil. But what about the goodness and the beauty? And Tolkien's approach of beauty is he's able to extract the goodness and the truth from creation and human experience and communicate it. But he communicates it through beauty, the beauty of a face, the beauty of a story, the beauty of a relationship, the beauty of an event. And, you know, we see at the end of Frodo's story, he's broken. You know, he loses everything, basically. He calls him a drug addict at the end because he's so addicted to the ring that he could never give it up if he wanted to. And he has a very real sense of PTSD from this whole experience. But because of his mercy, the world is saved. But he himself is sacrificed. And Tolkien draws that out in a way that is moving. and he still offers hope and consolation because he felt like there was hope and consolation to be found. And so he doesn't give him quite the perfect ending one would see in a Disney movie, perhaps, but he gives him the realistic hope that is offered, I believe, to human beings, and says, there is consolation even for this great wound that might not be healed. And I think that that's how he brings excellence. And so modern writers can capture that, but it has to be an excellence of craft combined with seeing the world clearly in a way that nourishes the imagination. I think that's how it can be done, and probably is done. I just haven't read those books yet.
Well, as a writer, I've not ever achieved that. It's what I would aspire to achieve, but I'm still learning. I'm still trying to work out how to do that in a way that doesn't come across as either pastiche or cheesy or unearned. And I think the thing in Lord of the Rings is that the beauty is earned. It's very dark, and the darkness is very, very dark. And obviously Tolkien's own experience of the wars were very, very dark, which makes the beauty shine out all the more strongly. And so that's something to aspire to. So that's the mission. That's the challenge. So at the end of our podcast, Lisa, we always have a little section where we decide where is the best in whatever fantasy world we want to choose to go for something. So in the past, we've done things like where's the best tavern to go to, or the best where to go into space, we did recently. So in honor of your theme, I'd like to ask you where you think is the best place to go to see and experience transcendent beauty. Where would you pick if you were walking through into a book world? Where do you want to end up?
Wow. Honestly, in the books that I read a lot of Westerns when I was a kid. and I have to say, I was so enraptured by, places like, the mountains and, the Grand Canyon, places that are just so wilderness oriented, that there's such a raw beauty in that kind of world. And it makes you long for it, even if you haven't been there yourself. And I have not read enough fantasy. I've only read a handful of fantasy books, and I did not find that transcendental beauty in those books. But I think for those that have really tapped into that beauty, you can find it, whether it's in these, classic books, even in Jane Austen, you see this very, country life that, it feels very quintessential. It's something like, from Beauty and the Beast, where you just want to go out into this, this, almost this wilderness or this countryside and just get that raw, natural beauty. But then there's also things like in Doctor Who, where you've got, was it stingrays like flying through the air, and there's something beautiful about those other worlds, those alien worlds that are really captured, through CGI. And
of course, Avatar, that was all about the beauty of that world that was under threat. Really they use the 3D to great effect there, didn't they? Right. What about? I'm going to allow you Tolkien though. So in Tolkien's world, which of his very beautiful places would you pick to go and be a tourist?
I think Rivendell. I just have such a love for the mountains and the way that all these structures are built into the natural world. You imagine Rivendell as just this beautiful craftsmanship, just in harmony with nature, and then these, cascading mountains. I would just love to live there. That is probably the place I want to live. And then of course there's Valinor, where it just feels so mysterious because it's somewhere you could never go and somewhere a human could never set foot. I would just love to see those streets with gems just cast all over, the shore. And I don't know, it's just mind-bogglingly beautiful in my mind. So
I think I've always wanted to go to Lorien or Lothlorien, because that's the place that captured me as a child. I mean, I think Rivendell too, but I felt that particularly the Fellowship of the Ring builds to Lorien, really. It comes at such a moment of reprieve after so much darkness that it felt I love trees, so I think that's part of it too.
Lothlorien was very moving, and so yeah, I can certainly agree with that. That there was a sense of it was moving, it was awe-inspiring, and then it also gave a sense of rest, which is so often neglected, I think, in whether it's in conversation or theology or whatever, novels, just this idea of rest. Tolkien always puts a space of rest in order to prepare for the next part of the journey, and I think that is so important to the nourishment of the soul.
And it also just came to me that the other place that I've always associated with this is the sea at the end of the Dawn Treader, where the sea turns sweet, and Lucy's looking over the side of the ship and she sees the mer girl below, and the whole sort of parallel universe of the mer people having their own worlds that they just sail over, they never encounter, but he's got a sense of more. And I remember going to Zanzibar I don't know if you've ever been to Zanzibar. It's on the east coast of Africa. And the seas there are turquoise. And I thought, my goodness, this is exactly like, except then it's not sweet. Don't try drinking it.
Don't drink it.
So sometimes you get these little glimpses of like a coral reef off Zanzibar, and you think, yes, I remember reading as a child that book, and it opens that door into your transcendent beauty and that sense of awe about the amazing creation that we have been entrusted and not doing a very good job of looking after.
Yeah, there's a sense of stewardship of beauty and then even imagination. Like I think we've as a culture we've let our imagination rot, I think.
Okay, so let's try and turn it around. So this is so anyone listening to this, let's all of us try and turn it around. Let's be better stewards of creation and also better writers when it comes to this aspect. Thank you so much, Lisa, for spending time with us. It's been a real joy to meet you, and thank you for also exploring this idea in your work. It's great to see that element, which I think we all sense, but it's really good that someone actually just pushes it forward and says, look, this is how it works. This is the power behind something we're also affected by. So thank you so much.
Oh, yes, thank you so much for having me. This is wonderful.
Thanks for listening to Mythmakers Podcast, brought to you by the Oxford Centre for Fantasy. Visit oxfordcenterforfantasy.org to join in the fun. Find out about our online courses, in-person stays in Oxford, plus visit our shop for great gifts. Tell a friend and subscribe wherever you find your favourite podcasts worldwide.